Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very pleased to have the Reverend Charles DeWatteville from the Sacramento Valley Unification Church with us today. Thank you, Charles, for joining us.
Great to be here.
Will you tell us where you were born and raised?
Yeah, I was born in Orlando, Florida, but my dad was military, so we traveled and I grew up pretty much all over the place. I went to high school and college, though, here in California.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I'm the oldest. I have one brother and one sister.
What branch of the military?
Air Force.
So you've seen the world a bit.
The United States.
Are your parents still living?
Yes.
And where are they?
Yeah. My mom's here in Sacramento. My dad's in Monterey.
Very good. How about, was childhood and growing up and high school and on the move and all that stuff a happy time?
Yeah. I'm pretty fortunate in my family situation. We did move around a lot, but I guess probably when I was in, I think, maybe third grade, my family was not all that religious. We went to church on Christmas and Easter, but I started getting involved with the base Protestant church, singing in the choir and like that, and so developed kind of my own personal relationship with Jesus, and just felt comfortable being alone. I'm somewhat of a loner anyway, so it was not a problem, and moving around a lot, I'd make one or two best friends, and that would be sufficient.
And what did you study in college?
I got my undergraduate degree in child development. I'd written my own, this is back in the 70s, so I was involved a lot in the New Age movement and studied Gestalt psychology and body work and all these mind-body integration techniques. I had written even a major in dance and movement therapy, but eventually I settled in child development and started a graduate program in family counseling.
And how did you come to your particular faith?
Well, actually, when I was in this graduate program, I'd kind of gone through a course. The summer before I started graduate school, I traveled around America hitchhiking and singing on street corners, making up spontaneous versions of my version of the truth, feeling like God had called me to be a prophet. And then I came back and felt all along that the family, from my psychological background and thinking, was the key to the problem to building world peace. Like, if I can work with families and build better, healthier families, then that's the key. That's going to be the answer. And so I started graduate school, but the problem with psychology is that it doesn't include the spiritual dimension of people very much. And while I was studying, I met the Unification Church. People were out witnessing, and started studying, went to one of their weekend workshops. And through the course of the workshop, I was profoundly moved by the content of the church teachings, especially because it has such a deep focus on the value and the importance of the family. So at the end of that workshop, I was filled with all kinds of ideas of how I was going to integrate our relationship with Jesus and with God, with family therapy, and had my thesis already figured out, and all kinds of great ideas. And then on the last night, they said, well, you know, maybe God wants you to do more than just write about it. And I went out, and we were out in the mountains and spent some time praying, and really felt Jesus calling me, saying, look, you hitchhiked all around the country. You thought you were doing all this great stuff and teaching classes on body awareness and like that, but you know, I'm really calling you to commit yourself to something substantial now. And I had a really profound and tearful experience with Jesus that night, and basically at that point committed to participating in the Unification Church and following Reverend Sun Myung Moon as my spiritual leader.
And how old were you when that happened?
About 22.
Jump back for just a minute. How were you received on those street corners when you were singing?
Oh, yeah, you got to remember, this is the 70s, the end of the 60s kind of movement, and with my beard and my ponytail, and it was the time for that. It was easy to sing and make up things and interact with people. It was actually the 60s and 70s had an incredible potential for goodness and change in America. It was just such an amazing time, and for me, it's a huge tragedy that all of that energy and enthusiasm for let's make a better world got really co-opted by free sexuality, immorality, by drugs, and really selfishness. And so, unfortunately, all that energy, which was great, I saw all over the country, for let's bring something new, something better, didn't really have a perspective that could guide it in a healthy way that would lead us towards that kind of world.
I was in the military on the North Dakota-Canadian border during Woodstock. And the very next year, in a town called Zap, North Dakota, there was a man who wanted to pull off Woodstock 2. He had the big pasture, the clear way in, the rights, a nice little mercantile store, you know, sitting out in front in the service station. And he spent a lot of money trying to pull off Woodstock 2 and just couldn't. And I've never heard of Zap, North Dakota since then, but I've wondered about that many times. Hitchhiking around, were you at a point in time where no fear, no concern, as would be today, you just sort of pin your hair back and say, here we go?
Yeah, it's sad because back then hitchhiking was a wonderful experience. I had a lot of confidence also, you know, that God was guiding me. But I met so many different people from very diverse backgrounds, truck drivers, rednecks, you know, the whole range of people that were always had great experiences. You know, sometimes when I was traveling across the country, people would take me, I stayed overnight at their house, and they would take me out to the local swimming hole. It was just an amazing, beautiful place that no one would know about but the locals. And it was such a great experience. And unfortunately, again, kind of with the craziness of selfishness and drugs and abuse and violence that kind of came out of that culture, it's no longer like that now. And, you know, I definitely would not encourage people to hitchhike at this point. And it's sad. It's unfortunate because I met so many great people, had wonderful experiences, you know, just learning about the world.
Before cell phones and the internet, were you staying in touch with your family while you were out and about?
Postcards.
Postcards.
Yeah.
My father was a truck driver, and in my childhood, as the Korean War came to an end, the boys would be hitchhiking home, and sailors and Marines and infantrymen, and he would pick them up and bring them home for supper, and they would sleep on the couch, and Mother'd fix a nice meal, and then he'd haul them down the road another 100 miles, you know, the next morning. And we always just thought that was kind of exciting and a pretty cool deal. Before we go into family, which you brought up, and I'd really like to talk about that more, do you have hobbies and things that you can keep yourself balanced with in your life these days?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up because I both have a full-time job and also am a volunteer for the pastor position. But my main entertainment is usually reading. I like science fiction and fantasy. Fantasy more because it does more good and evil, kind of. You know, I like that struggle between good and evil, and
good usually wins.
And good usually wins. And science fiction, not always good wins. So sometimes people like to be creative. But reading, I like getting out, walking. Always being in nature, you know, whenever I have that opportunity, it's a blessing, but sometimes that's hard to make time for.
Now, you volunteer as the Reverend?
Right.
So you have a real job in real time?
Yes.
And what is that?
I build databases, simple access databases for a company that evaluates social service programs. So I really enjoy it because a lot of times I'm working with small nonprofits who for them, the computer is a fancy typewriter. And they have all their information on pieces of paper, and they want to find something out, they have to go through and count papers. So building databases helps them be able to keep track of what they're doing, and working with evaluation helps them discover, is what I'm doing really making a difference, or am I accomplishing my goals, and that kind of sort of thing. And I really enjoy that kind of work because I feel like it's making a very positive difference in organizations who want to make a difference.
Let's talk family for a minute. Do you have children?
Yes, we have one daughter.
And is she healthy and well? And
yes, she just got back from 1 year traveling around Europe as a missionary, church missionary. And she's in college now at American River College.
And were you able to text her or cell phone her regularly and hear from her?
Actually, they had pretty much a condition where they no email or Facebook, which was probably one of the most challenging things for my daughter, because she's definitely of that generation. Once a week, they got on Sundays they'd have an hour, and each participant would give a call home, and we'd have an hour conversation. So that was how we kept in touch.
We have children who served missions. One was in Japan, and one was in Holland, and one was in Argentina. And we got to write the weekly letter, and then get the weekly letter back, and you always look forward to that. And they were short and crisp. We're well, we're fine, we're working, so on and so forth. Those are good experiences for young people.
Yeah.
Now, I've been to where you worship. It's a sweet and peaceful and gentle and loving place. How is your congregation and your church here in Sacramento Valley?
They're doing well. It's a relatively small congregation. We have maybe 30 families in Sacramento, and probably half of our congregation is under the age of 12. So we have lots of really young people. And we just, a little over a year ago, moved into that space that you visited. And that's been a real blessing to have a home where we can have more activities besides just meeting on Sundays.
That was a nice feeling of goodness and godliness.
Great.
Where's the place of God in our society these days, in your opinion?
Well, boy, that's a very good question. Our church movement, when Reverend Moon first came to America, he said that there were, God had called him to America because there are three big problems. Number one was the problem of atheism, secular humanism, and communism. At that time, in the 70s, communism was really powerful around the world. And that we'd gotten away from God at the center of everything was a very serious issue for America's future. And a lot of campaigns were, God Bless America, and at the 200-year anniversary, had a anniversary recognizing that God was at the core of the founding of America. And at the bicentennial, there was really no recognition or celebration of the fact that at the core of America's prosperity and success is a belief in God. So that's actually, God is critical for America and actually for the world, for bringing peace and healing. The other two concerns that Reverend Moon had was the breakdown of the family, which is the first place where we learn about God. Because even as children look at their parents, that relationship with their parents is the first experience of the Almighty, because parents are the Almighty for their children until they grow and can have their own relationship with God. But the third was the fact that Christianity and religion in general was so divided, so much in conflict with each other, so that the people who were representing God in the world were fighting each other. And this, Reverend said, this is one of God's greatest griefs and pains, that his children, who he loves desperately, are continually fighting and bickering and wars, so much violence. So the third main emphasis was, how do we bring people of faith together to recognize our commonality so that God can really work powerfully in this country and in this world?
We've talked over and over in Interfaith about being children of God, all of us. I mean, we're just repeating this, it's over and over. But interesting that nearly everybody claims to be a child of God, no matter who they call God or how or where. But the children of God can't get along.
Right.
And that has fascinated me quite a bit. I spoke to a high school religion class not too long ago, and the topic turned to family in the question and answer session. And it was interesting because these are awfully bright, capable young people, and they turned to the point of where their mothers taught them how to pray, or their fathers taught them the little songs of Sunday school sort of things, as well as the little ditties and the rhymes and all those other things. And as they went back, as they stopped to think about it, everything that they had learned that was basic and good had all gotten them started by their mother or their father. And as I sat there listening to them, I thought that's true with me as well.
Yeah.
Do you consider in your religion that we are brothers and sisters?
Yes, that's one of the most important foundations for peace in the world is we need to recognize that we all come from God, who is a compassionate, loving God, who we say our relationship with God is the highest form of love is parental love. So that experience of God's love is at the foundation of any kind of healing and peace. And the tragedy is that, from our Judeo-Christian tradition, it was at the fall of man that humanity became separated in that relationship. And that separation is why the brothers can't get along, is because they're not connected to God as the source. And there's so many different experiences and different cultures that have helped raise people up to understand God. And so we definitely validate the world's religions, the traditions that are all have the purpose of bringing people up, raising people up so they can experience God personally and more deeply in their lives.
How do you think Sacramento fits in the United States as far as being a religious city or lack thereof?
Sacramento is an amazing place, especially given the diversity that we have in Sacramento. It's, in the newspapers, Newsweek, are proclaimed Sacramento the most diverse city, and doing some evaluation of programs in some of the schools, seeing the incredible diversity of even languages within a classroom. So there's a lot of potential and richness in Sacramento, especially because we have a large immigrant population too that bring their culture and religious traditions. Another wonderful factor in Sacramento has been the Interfaith Service Bureau, now the Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento, as a source for bringing people of diverse faiths together to work together on projects and activities. And it's been, over the years when I was on the board and last 10, 15 years, challenges have come up with hate crimes or like that. And Sacramento has responded really well. Leaders from the diverse communities coming together to work together to address our common concern for building a better community.
Some weeks ago I went to a program in Chavez Park where a variety of faith leaders and community leaders were gathered, and there were about 10 people that they asked to make some little comment about Sacramento and how things were going. In the course of that, a woman who was out in the park came forward and came right up close by and sort of stared us all down and then said, "Well, when are you going to talk about God?" And we'd been talking about Sacramento and diversity and, some of the growth and those sorts of things. That caused me to pause and say, we better stand up. And I hadn't had a turn yet, and so I changed my comments midstream so we could get up and talk about God. Others who followed me did the same, and that whole thing turned a bit from social to a little more religious, and
Wonderful.
it worked out well. And as soon as she heard a couple start talking about God, she was satisfied, and she walked away and went on her merry way. Now, how do you see a difference between religion and us being a religious society in town and that versus being spiritual?
Well, religion is the tool that God has to try to raise us up and to educate us. So often religion serves as a stumbling block. When the tools that should be leading us in traditions and habits that connect us more deeply with God and connect us more deeply with each other as brothers and sisters, also can serve as, well, my tradition says this and yours is that, so therefore we're going to disagree. Spirituality, that's also tricky because, especially in America, we have a religion of, how to describe it, a secular humanist religion. It's a religion of the self. If it feels good, then it must be true. And so people will call that spiritual and say, recognize, oh, I have a spirit. I don't necessarily believe in God, but I know that I have a spirit. And that kind of, I could say it comes from the 60s where, we were just all free about everything. But there's a certain amount of irresponsibility that happens a lot, I believe, in some of the newer religious movements that move us away from accountability and responsibility towards, as long as I feel good spiritually, then I'm a spiritual person. And so it becomes a tricky point. And I won't say that all people who attend church are spiritual people. And I won't say that, just because you're religious doesn't make you a spiritual person. And not all people who don't attend church and consider themselves spiritual, many of them are profoundly spiritual and deeply committed in their lives. But we have this hazy area where selfishness really can dominate.
One of the things that I picked up on when we were adolescents and working toward college in the 60s was that free love brought immorality even to almost a spiritual plane. I can go out and do this, that, and the other. The religion was saying, no, don't do that. You abstain and don't do that. I talked to a man about my age not long ago who said he thought the greatest mistake he and his wife made was that they spent too much time talking abstinence and should have spent more time on birth control and what to do. I happen to disagree, but I thought it brought to mind one of the clear distinctions that our parents' generation didn't see, that our generation flowed through to, the present time.
One of the core teachings of our church is that the fall of man, the original sin of humanity, was that Adam and Eve, before they had matured themselves, actually the first purpose in life is to come to know God as an individual and to be able to reflect God's love. It's kind of the Hindu yogi kind of perspective. That's the first purpose. On that foundation of knowing God and knowing who we are, at that point, the second great purpose in life is to create a family. So you have a husband who knows God personally, a wife who knows God personally, who commit themselves. And actually, we also talk about God as being, we say Heavenly Father, but really God is our Heavenly Parent, a harmonized being of masculine and feminine. And we can reflect God's nature, not as an individual, but as a couple. So when a husband and wife unite, harmonize, committed to each other, completely giving to each other unselfishly, that creates a basis for God really to experience joy because he can see some of his nature reflected. The challenge for Adam and Eve is that before they grew to perfection or maturity, they came together as husband and wife. So the result is that the sexual relationship, which God designed to be the most profound, most beautiful, deep bringing together of a man and a woman so that they're no longer two people but one, it got mixed up with fear and confusion. And so we could say the first ancestors of humanity came together and became parents before they even had developed themselves the maturity to be a parent. Because actually parental love is the highest form, requires incredible sacrifice for the sake of others. If you're still kind of selfish and not confident in your love for another or your commitment, then it makes it so difficult to love your children the way God wants us to, just unconditionally, so they can experience God through us. So with the problem of sexuality and the breakdown of the family, we're looking at the core root problem that we say of all sin and all problems. It started with Adam and Eve coming together before they knew how to be true parents and, to love each other and creating a world that, that we see today.
I spent most of my growing up years in a bedroom with two older brothers, and we talked about a lot of things. But when I started to get to be 13 or 14 or 15, my oldest brother, who was fast approaching marriageable age, and that said to me one night, "Now remember, only date the girls that you think you'd want to be the mother of your children." At that time, I was sort of thinking, I'm not thinking about that. I'm just looking at the girls and their hubba-hubba, But as time went on, that made a lot of sense to me. And he said to me after I was married, "She will bear your children one of these days, and then you will owe her big time." That's right. And that's turned out to be true.
That's wonderful.
It's worked well. Anything happened to you better than being a father?
Absolutely. That's the most amazing experience. The universe changes when you become a parent. And in our teachings, it's so kind of the fulfillment of God's hope for each one of us is the first person is be a person of true love, create a family of true love, and when we can know and experience with our children God's love, then God can relate even more deeply and profoundly with us. So Reverend Moon's main mission, and we believe that Reverend Moon is the Messiah. We believe that Jesus called him to bring about change in the world, to lay the foundation for the kingdom of heaven on the earth in the real world. We don't believe he's God, but that is his mission. So he's guiding us in doing that, and that's our hope and commitment, and that we can do with our lives, and particularly with our families.
Nice visiting with you.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks for coming. We appreciate having you here, and hopefully others that watch this will enjoy this a great deal.
Thank you.
Thank you.